नतीशं समोहम्
My name is L.C. Singh. I have known Mr. Kohli for the last 4 decades. Mr. Kohli left his body at 96 for the higher heavenly abode. We knew the inevitable, yet we kept hoping that this day would not come. How does one describe Mr. Faqir Chand Kohli? Even for us who worked with him for decades, it is difficult to capture him in words. We can only imagine his formative years when he grew up in Peshawar, studied with distinction at Government College Lahore, Queen's University, Canada, and MIT in the US. He had an illustrious career in Tata Electric Company as an accomplished power engineer. Even in those days, we heard him often talk about his involvement with computing and computers. He moved to TCS as his second career and quickly turned his fortunes, and he set the changing course of TCS. He chose to work with young people and challenge them to leap across generations of technology and to find ways to create an environment which was nothing but the best. In 1976, at the annual conference of Computer Society of India, which he was the president, he said that India, which had missed the Industrial Revolution, had the ability to be a leader in the information technology revolution. Prophetic words, as they turned out to be, he engineered to make them happen. He could see the future and knew ways of quick navigation. He did not recognize boundaries in markets as he expanded all over the world. We knew him as someone who stretched our imagination and who made us believe in our unlimited capacity. He made TCS a huge family, caring for us not just as employees, but also as family members. He created a company and also pioneered an industry and set India on a course which brought its huge success and glory. After he retired from TCS, his third career saw him working on solving national problems, literacy, higher education, reaching technology to the masses through Indian languages, computing, and so on. Mr. Kohli's achievements cannot be confined to an industry. He did not just develop people to be more efficient, but he instilled in them a can-do attitude. Therein lies the largeness of his legacy. Upon reflection, we realize that his life was pure inspiration, not just for us who were fortunate to be by his side and help him in fulfilling his beautifully crafted vision, but will remain so for the future generations. Today, when we are here to pay our respects to the departed soul, we discovered solace in expressing our feelings in form of a poem. The poem titled The Lighthouse Keeper has been blessed by the legendary voice of Shri Shah. The background score has been composed by a young Bollywood musician. So presenting The Lighthouse Keeper.
You had the pick of the ocean, could have steered the 7 seas, been a king and not looked back, and yet a lighthouse keeper is what you chose to be. O lighthouse keeper, keeper of our light, a rock to anchor to, beacon for the dark night. Each of us here today, captain, admiral, chief, we are all sailors who found our north in the comfort of your keep. waters, maps without a name. Alone at the helm like Gibraltar you braced. Too mighty to be a journeyman, too humble to be a god. Farewell, my lighthouse keeper, keeper of my light. Your watch might have ended, but your life shall shine bright.
Namaskar. My salutations to the late Shri FC Kohli and heartfelt greetings to Mrs. Kohli, who has honored us with her presence here today. There has been an outpouring of love and tribute from all over the world. People from all across have, who have known Mr. Kohli as a teacher, as a mentor, as a colleague, as a friend. We have been countless requests to speak at today's ceremony. And unfortunately, we have been able to accommodate only a few of those esteemed guests today. We have, however, put together a website where a lot of these messages, prayers, and wishes have been included, even from people who we haven't been able to accommodate in today's ceremony. My name is Dipankar, and over the course of today's Shraddhanjali, I will be introducing the guests who would be sharing their thoughts and memories about the legendary FCK. Our humble request is for everyone to kindly keep themselves on mute during the session, and kindly unmute yourself only when invited to speak. Among the first to offer the tribute is Mr. Rajesh Kalra. Mr. Kalra is a highly respected journalist. He was the past chief editor of Times Internet and is presently the executive chairman of Asianet News and Entertainment. Mr. Kalra, may I request you to kindly share your thoughts?
Namaskar and hello everyone. Very difficult to start talking about a person with you who had more than a special bond in a way. I can go on for a very long time, but I will say just a few things. I got to hear of him first when I joined DataQuest as a reporter in 1987. I had just gotten out of college. He was the father figure of the industry, someone you respected, and at my level, you were in awe of him, complete and total awe of him. I got to meet him as a reporter and always found him to be straight, soft-spoken, and he was recognized by everyone as the leading light of the Indian IT industry. When I say very often, I have said that he did not get his due. I also want to add, some people may not like it, that after he left, I have seen a lot of comments from those around, including from the company where he served for such a long time, the group, all those flowery things. I don't want to name them, but can only marvel at their acting skills, for they were responsible for keeping him from getting his due in a way. If they are listening, they know what I'm saying. Nevertheless, although late in the day, I'm still grateful that they acknowledged him ultimately. I can also tell you that as a human being, I have never seen him badmouth anyone, whether inside or outside the organization. He was always dignified. The only time I ever heard him say anything to me about someone else from the industry or another IT honcho was, it was about a company which was trying to catch up with TCS, and that company is still trying to catch up with TCS, and they made some silly remarks about him. I remember asking him, I said, why won't you react to this? His response was very simple. He says, Rajesh, that company is still coming up. My talking ill of him will hurt his business. We want the industry to grow, so I am willing to forgive him. That was the class of the man, with zero insecurity, so self assured. As I said, I'm just sad that he never got his due. Anyone else with such contributions to the nation and its information technology, for which we are known the world over, he would have been a candidate for a Bharat Ratna by now. Let's hope something like that happens. I am very clearly going to work towards something like that for him. Let me also recount some personal anecdotes with him. I am a trustee of a free residential school in Dehradun that caters to the poorest of poor tribals in India. When we conceived the project, it was with the mind that we will use information technology to impart education using newer tools so that we can reduce costs and make it more impactful, because we didn't have the funds nor the teachers. So what happened, the person who was the brain behind the project, Tarun Vijay, asked me, who can we invite to be a patron for a project like this? I straight away said, let's talk to Mr. Kohli. But would he agree? I thought over it for 2 days. I was very, very scared. I knew he was very busy. How would he react? Why do you bring a silly, proposal to me? I went to him and approached him with a lot of doubts. He was a big man, a very big man. Would he agree? It took him less than a minute to say yes to me. And after that, he gave us ideas which made such a difference to the school. The school is called ITI. It's in Dehradun, and it was inaugurated by the Prime Minister of the country at that time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who came especially to inaugurate the school. Mr. Kohli was there, and both of them blessed the school together, and it is doing some wonderful work there. We also spoke a lot about work, and when TCS was launching its first real product for accounting, I think it was called EX. I think LC was also involved with it. He made me see the entire product before its release, explaining personally its ins and outs, how it will make a difference to the kind of things which are being developed in India. I remember I wrote for it in the Times of India, about it in the Times of India, and was thrilled to see that whatever I had written was printed on the product jacket when it was launched. This is about work and everything. Now I want to recall some of my personal experiences with him. Some of them are very, very personal. During one of my meetings, I got him interested in a book about the history of IT and TCS. And when you talk about the history of IT and TCS, it basically is also the history of the Indian IT industry. And if you really know the Indian IT industry, it would also be his own story too. I was excited. I worked very hard on it. He made sure I had access to every document that was required, which are all more than worth their weight in gold. And those documents included his interactions with JRD Tata, with all other biggies in the country and the Tata Group. Whoever was available and alive at that time, he made me meet them within the group and outside the group. I spent weeks and months meeting everybody, poring over thousands of mails and other documents. I would visit Mumbai, go to his place. He and auntie will make sure I have my lunch and dinner at home. And he would never discuss work with me and very little about the book. He will discuss about my health, my fitness routine, why I don't sleep, and all the things were very personal. But just when I had done more than 50% of the book, and I thought I'll give it another 2 months and I'll finish the book. I joined the Times of India as its chief editor for the internet division. And I told him I'll be very busy for a few months, but I have full intention of working on the book. That never happened again. I let him down completely. I was guilty. Over the time, my guilt grew. And when he would call me, I would start avoiding him. I was scared of him. What do I tell him? How do I face him? Then one day he met Tarun Vijay and told him, Tarun, please tell Rajesh, I love him a lot. I want to meet him before I go. Tarun called me and fired me for doing this to him. I remember sinking my head between my arms and crying immediately after that. Told myself I'll go and meet him. But I'm a coward. I never gathered enough courage to go and see him after that. I just want to tell you, Mr. Kohli, if you're hearing me, I love you too, and I'm sorry. Thank you.
Pankaj, you are on mute.
I'm sorry. Next is Mr. Pankaj Shukla, a senior journalist, film critic, and a creative consultant. He's currently the consulting editor for Amar Ujala. Mr. Shukla.
नमस्कार सभी लोगों को, जो लोग यहाँ उपस्थित हैं। फकीर चंद कोहली का नाम जब भी आता है, राजेश ने जो भी कहा, मतलब उससे मेरा भी गला भर आया। और वो जिस तरह के इंसान रहे होंगे, जो लोग उनसे मिले होंगे, मैं तो मिला नहीं कभी, लेकिन हमारा देश जो है वो क्रांतियों का देश है। यहाँ पे ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन हुए हैं, व्हाइट रेवोल्यूशन हुए हैं, कंप्यूटर रेवोल्यूशन हुआ है। क्रांति का जनक एक शख्स जो हमारे बीच था अभी तक, पिछले महीने तक, जिसके बारे में इस देश के बहुत कम लोगों को पता है। गलती हमारी भी है कि हम लोगों ने बताया नहीं उनको। गलती उन लोगों की भी है जिन्होंने उनके साथ काम किया और उनके काम की चर्चा लोगों तक पहुंचाई नहीं। गलती उन सरकारों की भी है जिन्होंने कभी उनके योगदान को सराहा नहीं या उनके बारे में खुलकर इस पीढ़ी को बताया नहीं। आईटी इंडस्ट्री में वो कैसे आए? जिस आदमी ने लाहौर में पढ़ाई की, पेशावर में जिसके पिता की पर्दे की दुकान थी, वो आदमी जाता है अमेरिका पढ़ने, लौट कर आता है, बंबई में बिजली देने वाली जो पहली कंपनी है VST, उसके फॉर्मेशन में साथ देता है, और फिर वो एक करियर छोड़ के रिस्क लेता है अपनी जिंदगी का सबसे बड़ा कि मैं आईटी इंडस्ट्री में जाऊंगा। और 40 साल उसने अपनी 45 साल अपने जीवन के लगा दिए इस देश के लिए। उस आदमी की श्रद्धांजलि देने के लिए हम यहाँ इकट्ठे हुए हैं। और हर आदमी जिसने भी उनके काम के बारे में सुना है, उनके समर्पण के बारे में सुना है, उसकी आंखें भर आएंगी। आई एम सॉरी। तो कहना मेरा यही है कि भारत और पाकिस्तान के बीच की जो बातचीत बंद हो गई थी बीच में, एक आदमी पाकिस्तान में जन्मा, बंटवारे के बाद वो हिंदुस्तान में रहा, हिंदुस्तान को आईटी इंडस्ट्री के एक ऐसे शिखर पर लाया है जहां पूरी दुनिया उसको आईटी हब के तौर पे देखती है। आज की तारीख में टीसीएस की अगर हम वैल्यू देखें तो आज IBM और एक्शन से कहीं ज्यादा है। उस आदमी ने देश को आईटी के लिए क्या नहीं दिया है? मैं तो कहूंगा सिंह साहब से कि वो उस पर एक बायोपिक बनाए, फिल्म बनाए, ताकि पूरी दुनिया जाने उनके बारे में उस आदमी ने क्या किया है। और सरकार से गुजारिश है मेरी, एक पत्रकार के तौर पर, एक भारत के नागरिक के तौर पर, कि ऐसे शख्स को भारत रत्न दिया जाए। पद्म भूषण उनको सरकार ने दिया है, उनकी सेवाओं को सराहा है। भारत रत्न के सही हकदार हैं, ताकि उनके योगदान को आने वाली पीढ़ियां याद रखें। और उस योगदान को आगे भी बनाए रखने के लिए हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी है कि हम ज्यादा से ज्यादा अगली पीढ़ी को बताएं कि फकीर चंद कोहली कौन थे, उनका इस देश के विकास में क्या योगदान है। एक ऐसा व्यक्ति जो लगातार काम करता रहा। मैं तो उनको ये मानता हूँ कि वो इतने परफेक्शनिस्ट थे कि वो बाकी किसी चीज में यकीन ही नहीं करते थे। मैं पढ़ा था सिंह साहब की ओलॉजी थी, वो उन्होंने लिखा हुआ था कैसे वो प्रेजेंटेशन लेकर गए, और उन्होंने जब सिर्फ एक पन्ना उनका उल्टा लगा हुआ था, उन्होंने क्या लुक दिया कि ये क्या लेके चले आए मेरे पास। हो सकता है वो आदमी श्रूड हो सकता है वो आदमी थोड़ा स्ट्रिक्ट हो, लेकिन जो भी लोग दिल के साफ होते हैं, जो भी लोग कुछ बड़ा करना चाहते हैं, मेरा अपना पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस है कि वो लोग बहुत मधुर नहीं होते हैं। उनके एजेस शार्प इसलिए होते हैं, एजेस रफ इसलिए होते हैं क्योंकि उन्होंने अपना जीवन वैसा ही बनाया है। तो वो कभी सॉफ्टनेस के चक्कर में नहीं पड़े और अपना काम करते रहे। तो फिर से मैं उनको एक बार यहाँ पे श्रद्धांजलि देता हूँ, और मैं सबसे, जितने लोग यहाँ पे मौजूद हैं, सबसे गुजारिश करूंगा कि उनके काम को आगे बढ़ाया जाए। एक कुछ ऐसा काम किया जाए कि वो यादगार रहे, चाहे वो FC कोहली के कामों का कुछ कहीं संकलन हो, कहीं उनका मेमोरियल हो, कहीं एक वेबसाइट जैसे बनाई गई है, कहीं कोई संग्रहालय IT का बन रहा हो तो उसमें उनके काम को दर्शाया जाए। सिंह साहब से मेरी निजी गुजारिश है कि उनके ऊपर एक बायोपिक को बनाने का ऐलान करें आज। उस तरह के कुछ काम होने चाहिए ताकि उनको हम याद रखें, आने वाली पीढ़ियां में उनको याद रखें। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद। Mr. Anil Kaur, he's an entrepreneur, a businessman. Mr. Kaul had a special relationship with TCS and Mr. Kohli when he was the MD of Oracle India. may I request Mr. Kaul to kindly share some of his thoughts.
Thank you, Dipankar. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So firstly, I think I'd like to extend my sincere condolences to Mr. Kohli's family and all his extended family, which is really all of TCS, because I think it was always his family, and you probably all feel that sincerely. So I think I'd like to do that first of all. But most of all, I think what we should be doing is celebrating a great life, and a life lived very well, very fully, and an enormous contribution that he's made to the country, to TCS as a company, to the Tata Group by making TCS such a powerful institution.
Mr. Kaul, you're on mute.
Yeah, I see. Okay, can you hear me now?
You're back.
Okay, great. I first met FCK in July 93. And that was, can you hear me okay there?
Yes.
Yes. July 93. And my first impression was he's a very stern man, very commanding personality, great deal of charm, a bit formal. But, you know, fast forward perhaps 4.5 years and he joined us at an event in Southeast Asia. And that's when I saw the other side, a man with a great sense of humor, tremendous wit and charm. And most of all, I think an insight and an ability to form lasting partnerships. He was a great man for forming partnerships that endure. And I think that has helped TCS grow exponentially. So most of all, what I saw, I'll come to that in a second. I had one complaint always at that time, which is I felt that the company wasn't aggressive enough. For my liking, I'm talking about 90s, early 90s. With the exception of LC Singh, of course, who I thought was always on the front foot. But I was wrong, I think, because what actually Mr. Kohli was doing, what FCK was doing, was laying a foundation that was solid and that was very strong and that enabled other people later on to actually show some of that aggression in the global IT industry. Of course, I would still like the Indian IT industry to be far more aggressive, but I think Mr. Kohli provided a foundation that showed that he was the architect that understood how the world worked in IT and IT services and how it was possible to offer a compelling advantage. I salute that gentleman for the enormous contribution he's made to the country and to the Tata Group, and I wish his family well and peace of mind, and bless his soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaul. Joining us from Switzerland is Mr. Pierre Page. Mr. Page knew Mr. Kohli since about 1970 from Burroughs Corporation in Switzerland.
Voilà. You can listen to me?
Yeah, Mr. Page, please do continue. Just in continuation, he's one of the greatest friends of Mr. and Mrs. Kohli, and became an associate of TCS and brought TCS its most prestigious projects in Switzerland. Mr. Page, please continue.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have been knowing Mr. Kohli for more than 40 years now, and I would like to concentrate on one aspect of FC Kohli that is maybe not so well known, which is his humanity. Everybody knows he was a very demanding boss, but what about his humanity? And I would like to give a personal example on this. When I was working as a manager at Burroughs, and there was discussion about leaving Burroughs Computers and starting an organization to promote TCS in Switzerland first. He wanted to be sure that this very important decision for me was the right one. And so he invited me, it was 1983, in Bombay for 1 week with my wife in order that I can see what TCS has to offer, how I can capitalize on the strengths and resources of TCS to launch a profitable business. At the same time, he also invited my wife to make sure that this decision, which will affect her, will not jeopardize my family. And this was really something which struck me at the time. Second thing I would like to mention is that, of course, the people he has made available to me to support a young organization starting was second to none. I mean, I got always a dream team, especially for this large project you speak about, where I had the feeling if we fail with these people, nobody else in the world can do it. So, and throughout these 22 years of experience I have with TCS, I only found really smart, dedicated people who has always helped me to succeed. And at the same time, what is maybe a little strange, knowing Mr. Kohli well, he gave me finally a large freedom of action. At the end, I could do, I will not say what I want, but I could do what was needed for the business, even if it's not always in agreement, which means that for 22 years, I had the privilege to be both at the same time an insider and an outsider. I enjoyed probably much more freedom of action than many executives at TCS. So this is what I wanted to cover today as remembering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paj. I would now like to invite Mr. Vineet Nair, the former CEO of HCL Technologies. He's also the founder and chairman of Sampark Foundation and an author. While at HCL, Mr. Nair managed the TCS account, and I think that kind of laid the foundation of his relationship with Mr. FCK. Mr. Nair.
So I'd like to start with condolence to the family of Mr. Kohli and all the friends who had the fortune of working with him very, very closely. My association with him started fresh out of college when I started my career in Bombay selling computers. And I had nothing to do with Mr. Kohli. Actually, I used to come meet Mr. Andurai and later Mr. LC Singh. And one day I got an opportunity of walking into his office. I don't remember why. He sat me down. His office was not a great looking CEO office, but it was a very Spartan office. He sat me down on one of those sofas. And for the first time, he asked me questions about myself. He didn't want to know about computers. He started asking me about my history. My father had died early. And he was very interested. I had never seen anybody in my life so interested in me. And that followed many conversations with him. And I would say that he was my first mentor, my first guru. And the idea of employees first, customers second, which I later in 2005 implemented in HCL, was actually Mr. Kohli's idea. He truly believed in people. He invested in people, whether they were employees or whether they were young people walking into his office. And therefore, I would say that he was my first mentor. And I had, fortunately, a great opportunity of meeting him 2 years ago, where I shared with him what we were doing at Sampark Foundation. He was very happy. He remembered me, which is, which only he can do. But I would say that India misses a fabulous leader. Indian IT industry, he was the father, will miss a fabulous leader. And all of us human beings should celebrate whoever he has touched. He has touched in a way we will never forget. And that is his memory, and that is the celebration today. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to pay my homage to him, his friends, and his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. Mr. Ravi Pandit, a graduate from MIT, which is also the alma mater for Mr. Kohli. Mr. Pandit is a chartered accountant and the founder of KPIT. May I request Mr. Ravi Pandit now?
Thank you, Deepankar. I must begin by first paying my condolences to Mr. Kohli's family and to his greater family, I think, which includes all of us. I had the privilege of interacting with Mr. Kohli since the late 90s, since the late 80s, because at that time I was a partner in an accounting company called G.N. Joshi, and we were the auditors of TCS. So I had the privilege of signing many, many balance sheets of TCS, and in that context, be in deep touch with Mr. Kohli. We also had a special relationship because I also went to MIT. I must say I had the extraordinary privilege of enjoying the affection of Mr. Kohli. I used to meet him very often, first in the Express building and then in the Bombay house every now and then just to see him. And actually, I should say to draw inspiration and courage from him. Much to his humility, he would always give me a credit for teaching me accrual basis of accounting. And I think it was a credit not completely deserved, but he would never forget that. I would see him and Mrs. Kohli quite often at various airports. And I was always amazed at the energy that he had and the concern that he had, which went much beyond TCS or the IT industry, and it covered India as a whole. He used to tell me about his work on literacy and on education. He, so to say, took up the College of Engineering Pune as his institution and did a lot of work for them. And for that, he used to visit Pune. And I believe that if in the Western world, India is no more known as the country of serpent charmers, but as a company of extremely bright IT professionals, I think the credit should go to him because he started the Indian IT industry. I know many of the CEOs of many IT companies in the country have been his students. And so I remember once when we received an award at the hand of the president, KPIT received an award for the fastest growing small size company, and Mr. Kohli received a Lifetime Achievement Award. And there were many who were around, and Mr. Kohli rightly said that almost all the top leaders of the IT industry at that time were the students of the institution called TCS. I think all of us owe an enormous amount of debt for him. I was the fortunate one who enjoyed his affection a lot, and I will miss him. I think he was a great soul. I'm sure he's up there looking very benignly to all of us and taking great joy in seeing so many of us contributing to the growth of our country. Thank you, Deepankar, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pandit. Mr. N. Lakshmi Narayan. Mr. Lakshmi Narayan had an illustrious career of over 20 years under Mr. Kohli. He's the founder of Cognizant Technologies India, from where he retired as vice chairman. He's the former chairman of NASSCOM. May I request Mr. Narayan to kindly share his thoughts.
Thank you. This is a tribute to no ordinary person, a person who has changed the lives of so many and made the lives of millions better, richer, and more purposeful. Mr. Kohli is a man who worked till the very end, worked with a purpose and worked with the zeal that compares to that of an Olympic athlete. A very purposeful life till the very end. A huge lesson for me, and I'm sure for many others like me and all of us here today. To keep the mind engaged at all times, to contribute to society, and to contribute to learning at all times without any return or any expectations. If each one of us can live up to that goal of tireless work, Mr. Kohli can observe from above, India is no longer a poor country. His wife, Mrs. Varan Kohli, was his constant companion. In the full life that Mr. Kohli led, you invite him for an event or a wedding, he'll be there. You invite him for NASSCOM's annual strategy retreat, he'll be there. Whether it is Goa or Sri Lanka or Varanasi, Mr. and Mrs. Kohli will be there like everyone else, enjoying life, contributing, and behaving like anyone else in the group. We should all take an example of Mr. Kohli for leading a full, energetic life. A very keen interest in bringing to India the latest computers and technology, I recollect the Tata Steel computerization project that TCS was chosen to be a consultant for. In mid-80s, TCS made the recommendation that Tata Steel should import an IBM mainframe. This was even before TCS got its first mainframe computer. Everyone knew that the government will not allow the import, but Mr. Kohli said, we should fight that battle and not change our recommendation. Tata Steel, on the other hand, felt that import of an IBM mainframe as a non-starter and suggested that TCS better recommend Nelco 5000 VD machines and implement a steel plant-wide network of about 25 Nelco computers. In the final presentation to Dr. Irani, Dushyant Lal, an ex-TCS, asked a question to Dr. Irani. Sir, if you want to transport 300 people from Delhi to Jamshedpur, we can do it in a single jumbo jet or bring them in 40 Vayudut planes. And we don't know how many of them will make it if we travel by Vayudut. Those of you who remember Vayuduts will know it. That's one of the arguments that helped Mr. Kohli have his way against the will of Mr. K.C. Mehra, Mr. Ishaq Hussain, and others. Tata Steel was one of the first non-IT company in the country to get an IBM mainframe. And Mr. Kohli had his way if he knew that the way was right. Finally, a salute to Mrs. Varan Kohli for being such a devoted wife and taking care of Mr. Kohli like a mother would a baby. May God give us the will to stay the course, Mr. Kohli's course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narayan. I would call upon Mr. M.V. Subbaya. He's an industrialist, the former chairman of Murugappa Group. He's also the former president of CII and a very well-known philanthropist. Mr. Subbaya.
Mrs. Kohli and friends, it's a privilege for me to join all of you in today in paying tribute to Mr. Faqir Kohli. I had the pleasure and privilege of being with him on the Triveni Engineering Board for several years and was always deeply impressed by his in multiple ways. First, though Mr. Kohli was much older than many of us, he was always sharp and alert and asked very, very searching questions. Second, he had a special concern for people and was focused on giving back to people in any way we could. Third, unlike many others, he had great confidence in the capability of Indians to perform, to achieve, and to excel. This was followed by the fourth, which is a belief that we Indians could develop on our own. We could move forward on our own. We need not be dependent on others. Fifth, he had the greatest interest in education and leveraging IT to make a real difference, particularly for a person who came from the abrasive industry, from the shop floor. I had no idea at all on the use of IC, and he was the one who got me to understand it for the first time. Last but not the least, he was one of the most humblest person that I've ever met. He had time for every child and every person that he met. He always gave me the impression that he works 24/7 in trying to build leaders in every person that he came across. These are some of the unique characteristics of Mr. Kohli, a great man. I learned so much from him in the years we spent together. He was a great teacher, and may
his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm calling upon Mr. G. Vijay Raghavan from Trivandrum. He's the former planning board member and the founder of the first Techno Park of Asia at Trivandrum. We also got FCK to agree to open the Global Training Center of TCS at Trivandrum. Mr. Vijay Raghavan.
Thank you very much for having me on this call. First of all, let me pay my respects to Mr. Kohli and hope God gives the strength to Mrs. Kohli, the family, and all of us who are here to bear this big loss. I've known Mr. Kohli since 1990, and this was when the pre-feasibility report for TCS for the Technopark was being done by TCS. And that's when I came to know Mr. Mahalingam first, and there used to be one Rangarajan who used to work with us. I later came to know about, interact with Mr. Ramadurai, and Mr. Kohli introduced me to him. But what I liked about Mr. Kohli the most was he was very clear when he wanted to do something. And I remember when, after the report was done, I told him to take some land at Technopark, and he said, okay. And then when he wanted to do the building, he said, if you give me the approval for the building, before I get it in Madras, we will start work. And we actually gave him the building approval in a day. And he said, are you sure you have the powers for that? And he said, I want to see the order. We got it. And he started work there. And what was really interesting about this was that relationship continued, that he called me a few years after I left Technopark and said, you haven't kept your promise. I didn't realize what it was. And I said, what was it? And he said, you said that you would get somebody to build a hostel for TCS. And I said, I left Technopark, but let me work on it. I did that. And a very interesting thing which was there is that he wanted it to be designed so well, it was probably better than the best hotel in Trivandrum. But when it came to one simple thing where I said, do you want hot water in the rooms? He said, no, young engineers should take bath in cold water. That is a kind of small, and he used to go into the minute details of that. And I remember when he and Mr. Ramadurai together were discussing on how this project should go forward, he actually had very, very detailed things. So that detailing of what was important, the welfare of the employee was very important. Another thing which I should just tell is that I suddenly got a fax message from Egypt for a contract to do a technology park there. And I didn't know what it was. When I went there, they told me, oh, you didn't know? This was meant for TCS. But when we were going to sign the contract, Mr. Kohli said, no, give it to Vijay Raghavan, he might do a good report. So that is the kind of interest he had. And he had a very personal relationship with Mr. Nambiar. When we called him for the Mr. Nambiar's 75th birthday celebration in Trivandrum, he flew down for that. But what I remember most about him is his interest in young minds. And I once invited him to the Trivandrum International School. And he said, what will I speak to the children? I said, they'll ask questions. He actually answered all those questions that the children asked. And this was something which was great. So his soft corner was there for Trivandrum and Kerala. I remember 76 when I was a student, he inaugurated the IEEE chapter here. 25 years later, he came for the Silver Jubilee celebrations also. So that relationship with him, in fact, I've asked a lot of people who the father of the Indian software industry was a standard question that I asked with every engineering college I spoke to. And for many of them, in fact, I think that is something which all of us need to do. I don't think the world knows enough yet. And like someone said earlier, we need to recognize this further. He will continue to be the father of the Indian software industry. So once again, I pray to God that Mrs. Kohli and the family have the strength to bear this great loss. For me, he was a teacher and a mentor and a big, big well-wisher. Thank you very much once again for inviting me to be part of this memorial meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We would like to invite Mr. Tarun Das. He is veritably the builder of the CII from its infancy to its preeminent role as an industry association. Without further ado, Mr. Das.
Thank you, Deepankar, and thank you to Maha to ask me to join this amazing group of people to celebrate the life, the vision, the leadership of Mr. FC Kohli. It's a great honor to be with Mrs. Kohli and all of you on this special day, the 13th day. In the 80s and 90s, Indian industry leaders used to tremble about competition. And I got a pushback from people when we talked about opening the economy. The first person, the first industry which gave India pride and the ability to look the world in the eye was the IT industry. And the founder, the creator, the builder of that, as so many of you have said, was Mr. FC Kohli. The confidence that he spread through his achievement, it spread like wildfire amongst many others. And people then felt that they could also compete in the world. So this was a very, very big change in attitude of Indian industry, starting with TCS and starting with the Indian IT industry. But he was more than that. He became, for all of us, a nation builder by transforming the way we worked, by transforming through his pioneering spirit, his courage, his amazing vision and perseverance. He became someone to follow, someone to emulate. He was an example for me of a person outside the government bringing change to the country. You know, when many people think that government has to do this, government has to do that, but he showed that change can be brought from outside government, and very big change for the nation, for the corporate sector, for people. And he was, for me, in my CII days, a role model, because I looked up to him in understanding that we also could contribute to bringing about small changes in the country following his example. He believed in technology, and today India is following his path, his footprint, and his way. A strong man, a tough man, a firm man, a demanding man, a down-to-earth man, a far-sighted man. I always saw him in a jacket and tie. And therefore I said, I cannot come today and not wear a jacket and tie. You know, I've dressed up for him today because he was my role model, and part of that was the way he dressed for me. He was so smart in every possible way. Thanks to him, his determination, TCS is a great Indian company, an Indian success story. And some of you, like Mr. Ramadurai and others, will understand what I mean by that. Because TCS need not have been an Indian story, but he made it happen. And he had the courage and the vision to persuade J.R.D. Tata that he would build TCS as an Indian company. Second, thanks to him, Tatas have TCS as a jewel in their crown, as the jewel in their crown, not a jewel in the crown, the jewel in the crown, in capital letters. Thanks to him, India's education, healthcare, development is being transformed using technology. So I humbly salute an extraordinary man, Mr. FC Kohli, the lighthouse keeper, as it was beautifully said in the poem, the institution builder, the technology builder. Thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you, Mr. Das, for those wonderful words. Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, scion of the large TVS group. Mr. Gopal Srinivasan has been a key participant in the electronics industry, former chairman of MAIT, which is the premier association of electronics manufacturers. I would request Mr. Srinivasan to kindly share a few words.
Let me offer my Shraddhanjali to the departed soul of Mr. Kohli and my condolences to his family. I had a very brief interaction on 3 different occasions with Mr. Kohli back in 1996, when the Indian computer industry, the hardware industry, which I represented as the president of the association, was exactly 4% of today's size. When I asked, who can give us the vision to become a global, large-scale player, everybody pointed to just one man who said who can provide that vision, and that was Mr. Kohli. So I went to his office, I made an appointment, and very much like he was described by Mr. Das, he was there impeccably dressed in his suit. A liveried butler came and delivered a wonderful cup of tea in perfect porcelain crockery. And he explained to me that nothing in India is possible to scale unless we devote ourselves to the service of Indians. He pointed out to me that no Indian knows how to even see a computer, leave alone program a computer. And unless Indians could program computers, for which the first step was adult literacy, a cause to which he completely devoted himself, I believe, post-retirement, nothing was possible. It was stunning because at a time when we never believed in ourselves, he talked about Atma Vishwas. At a time when the word Atma Nirbharta had not been invented, he had achieved Atma Nirbharta in terms of being self-reliant on the businesses that he led and drove. I met him again in Taiwan. I was surprised. In a large program that takes place every year there called Computex, he was the most important spotlighted speaker, and I was speaking after him. And all he spoke about was the fact that unless Indians learn to use computer devices in Indian languages, there is no future for India in terms of the hardware industry. I have interacted with him on 2 other occasions, but to me, the man's vision, his complete dedication to India, and his and level of humility, where everybody was the same, and it appeared he only existed to serve others and to serve the nation, has been an inspiration. I'm glad today that with the growth of the computer hardware industry, the electronics industry through PLI and other programs, was a vision that he was able to be there to see, because I know that was as close to his heart as creating great Indian companies like TCS and being the person who, like the lighthouse, ushered in the entire IT services industry. Even the electronic hardware industry has reached a level, and that too using Indian languages. It must have made his heart very, very happy. Thank you very much for the privilege to be able to speak briefly about my brief interactions, which made a lasting impact on me, on the idea of what a belief in Indians and a belief in India can do to transform what appeared at that time completely impossible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. I now call upon Dr. Vijay Bhatkar, Padma Bhushan Vijay Bhatkar, Maharashtra Bhushan. He is builder of the Param supercomputer, the founder of CDAC, with a stint at TCS as its vice president. Mr. Vijay Bhatkar.
If I had to reflect upon the great and most venerated from me and from Mr. Kohli, just in one line, and it's not what you call in Sanskrit Atishayukti, is that Mr. Kohli, if I had to identify one person who changed very sublimely, very subtly, the image of India. Now that's a big statement for a nation like this, so with such a great history. The image of India, the identity of India, the signature of India, I think it is Mr. Kohli. And he did it so silently, and nobody realized, as rightly said in the beginning, nobody realized that this is happening to India. I think Mr. Kohli, I had an opportunity to work with him in, of course, in TCS, but before that in Trivandrum, where he used to visit many times Mr. Nambiar, who was his friend, very close friend, and we used to discuss many things. And he had a dream that TCS should also be a great R&D powerhouse, creating systems of the future. And he will discuss with me that idea. How can we create futuristic systems for India based on completely Indian R&D? And that's how I came in contact with him. Really, he's a great man who has left indelible mark on me also. I think he called me to Pune, and my destiny changed. And that's how led to me supercomputing. And that's what we have started doing. I also know his contribution to College of Engineering, Pune. How he as chairman changed the entire college image, not only image, but the very perspective of what engineering is. There are so many things to be said about the man and his contributions. I offer my prayers. I offer my great veneration to this great person who really made, I think, a real mark on the destiny of India. Thank you very much. I offer my prayers.
Thank you, sir. I now call upon Mr. Tarun Vijay. He was the BJP MP and now the chairman of the National Monuments Authority. Mr. Vijay.
Thank you. I pay my Shraddhanjali to respected Kohli ji. I had the occasion to speak to him, meet him several times in his home, have dinner, in his office, and in Dehradun. He was the first to lend us support to help the tribal children from the northeastern region, from Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, Arunachal, Assam, Sikkim, and Uttarakhand, of course, and from Ladakh. He came forward, and when we didn't know anyone, he wrote letters on our behalf as patron to President Abdul Kalam ji, and brought special greetings and good wishes from the president. When we were stuck in any problem, you would write to the state bank and get us computers for the children in their school. Then whenever there was any issue like providing the literacy to Andhra people, especially in the rural area, he would call me and say that these are the points that he would like the Prime Minister Vajpayee to ponder over, and can you please connect him with these issues. He would also almost every month send me some presentation of the TCS, that how the TCS was helping in spreading the rural literacy, especially the technology going to the rural masses. And his only one mantra was, let the common people learn in their own language technology. They should become technology savvy and empowered with the technology. All his presentations were superb and we worked on it. He also helped us during the Kedarnath tragedy and especially issued a signed appeal to help the Kedarnath children, the destitute children who were victims of that tragedy in which more than 7,000 people had perished. Whenever I was in Bombay, he would ask that don't leave Bombay without seeing me. And his office was something where we chatted for hours. I think no meeting lasted less than 1 hour. But his main emphasis was that how the poverty can be addressed through technology. Technology must be used to eradicate poverty, to eradicate illiteracy, and to empower the common rural masses. We in Dehradun, in Information Technology Institute for the Tribes of India, solely for the tribal poor children of the Himalayan region, always remembered him, and we pay our condolences to the family and Swaranji. His greetings would not come this year, but we always received his greetings on Diwali and the New Year. My humble Shraddhanjali to him. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now call upon Mr. Ramdurai. He was the successor of Mr. Kohli at TCS, and I don't think he needs any further introduction. Mr. Ramdurai.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
We had a remembrance for the last hour or so, paying tributes to a mentor, educator, a visionary, a technocrat, all bundled into one person. I had the privilege of being mentored by him from day one, starting in 1972, which ultimately became not only a beachhead for the IT industry, but more importantly, the human qualities of Mr. FC Kohli came out extremely well, and that's what we talked about today. I think he was truly ahead of his times, and he challenged very correctly by seeing the potential of each and every person and pushing problems at them for common good. The way he addressed was by notes, which he would send me virtually half a dozen of them every day. And between the morning and the next day morning, we would have covered the entire globe with regard to what was happening within the industry. He used to throw a lot of books, articles to be read, but not to test you, but to share the knowledge, whether his understanding was as good as your understanding, and we could derive some examples from that. Ultimately, few things which I am reminded of is we visited your place. The second time around he came to the same place, his memory was so sharp that the smallest object in the house, if it had been displaced or removed, he'll be able to point out to you what happened to that painting or what happened to that object. Why we removed it, it was so looking so nice, the whole coordination was perfect. He was an architect par excellence, and he brought some of the best architects in the world to build the campuses of TCS because he wanted that kind of a knowledge transfer to happen to the architects at large within India itself. And when you see such a man, when you have experienced such a man, the last couple of interactions with me was almost on a monthly basis, either in person or over the phone, and the enthusiasm to see how people were doing, how the poverty was being looked at, how the technology changes are happening so fast. Two things which we always used to discuss was with regard to the hardware industry, because I started my career in TCS as a hardware engineer, and we always wanted the hardware industry to be growing in parallel to the software industry. But I think we are seeing the acceleration nowadays, and that's going to realize the dream this man had. I think he was one of the finest human beings, a family man, very close to me, close to my family. But more importantly, we are celebrating and remembering a man who lived till 96. But more importantly, even when I met with him in my house in Khandala on the 8th of March, he didn't want anybody to support him. He said, I can walk, I can pick up the food, I can appreciate the music, I can enjoy the children, I can enjoy the young human beings, and the human potential of this country is what is the most critical human capital building. Everything will follow from that. I think all of you have said enormous amount of good things for all of us, and personally me. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, a lot of memories to be remembered, but more importantly, sharing, caring, and nurturing is the way forward. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It has been organized extremely well by all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That means a lot. I welcome Mr. Jayant Krishna, Group CEO, UK India Business Council, the former CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation. He was with TCS for 22 years. Mr. Krishna.
Thank you, Dipankar. Thank you, Mr. LZ Singh. It's such a huge personal loss to lose somebody like Mr. Kohli, who was truly a colossus. Today, you know, if IT and ITS industry contributes 8 to 9% of our GDP, I think none of this industry would have existed but for Mr. Kohli, or at least would have lost its early movers advantage by a couple of decades. Any aspect of Mr. Kohli you look at, I remember for several years, in my initial years in TCS, he would put almost 20% of its people to work on domestic projects and largely government projects, which would fetch less than 10% to TCS's revenue. For he always believed that it will be a shame if our engineers do the cutting edge work, software work for the best of breed companies worldwide, Fortune 500 companies and others. And our own country is deprived of their services, So he would always make that investment for our own country. So many times I heard him say that, Government of India gave me a scholarship to study in Canada for, and all that I did in my life was to repay that gratitude to the nation. I've known him for the last 3 decades, but most of my interaction with him happened after he retired from TCS. And therefore, I had the privilege to see the human side of Mr. FC Kohli quite a lot. His iconic work in the adult literacy space, if the successive governments had taken it seriously and embraced it as a national program, I have little hesitation to say that India would have become a 100% literate country almost 15 years ago. Even now, no visit to Bombay would get over unless I go and meet him either at the Air India building or at his home. It was almost like a privilege, pilgrimage to go and spend some time with him, and it gave me a feeling as if one is drinking deep from the very fountainhead of knowledge. My heart goes out to Mrs. Kohli and the entire family for such a huge loss. I met him. I'd gone to Bombay to meet Mr. Ramadurai before COVID, and it was in the Air India building, and it was my fortune that I saw Mr. Kohli sitting in his room. And after my meeting with Mr. Ramadurai, I just went and met him and spent more than an hour with him. And what a privilege it was always. Some people said in this in this tribute session also that why he didn't get the Bharat Ratna. I feel he definitely should have got it, but it was lost for Government of India. They did not give it to him because Mr. Kohli belonged to a very different league of self-actualized leaders, and I'll put him in the same category as the late J.R.D. Tata, Dr. APJ Kalam, Mr. Verghese Kurian, or M.S. Swaminathan, E. Sridharan, or Mother Teresa. So for him, actually, these things didn't matter at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would welcome Mr. Rajesh Nambiar, Chairman and Managing Director of Cognizant India. He was formerly the CEO of IBM India and was with TCS for over 17 years. Mr. Nambiar.
Thank you, Deepankar. My condolences to Mrs. Kohli and the family. Like each of us in this call, I've had the privilege of working with Mr. Kohli and have learned a lot just from listening to him and also observing him. While several such moments come to my mind, obviously in the interest of time, today I will just say a few words about the respect that he commanded globally and the awe in which he was held across the board. I had the opportunity to accompany him a few times, more than a few times actually, to several clients in the United States especially. Every client Mr. Kohli met as the Bhishma Pitama of Indian IT industry, they would be very glad to hear from him and very eager to understand what he's going to say. He would be bombarded with requests for advice and questions about his varied experiences across the board, right? And the personification of modesty and simplicity that he was, he would downplay his achievements and yet deliver nuggets of wisdom, leaving his audience infinitely wiser. So a truly humble man who has inspired so much and so many of us in this call. So, and of course, across the world. So may his soul rest in peace. Thank you, Deepankar.
Thank you, Mr. Nambiar. I would now introduce a legendary person, Mr. YP Sahani. I believe he has not been able to join us here, but he has sent his thoughts and his wishes, and I'll read out a short speech that he had written for him. Introducing Mr. YP Sahni, he was the founder member of TCS, and Mr. Sahni has known Mr. Kohli for the longest, perhaps, and has had a close association with Mr. Kohli and his family. Mr. Sahni was the quintessential manager and COO, and with his soft touch, he provided the balm. Most TCSers would go running to him if they got the stick from Mr. Kohli, or to seek his help to convince Mr. Kohli. If there was trouble with a banking customer, he would douse fires. And Mr. Sahni retired as president and COO. And from beginning to their retirements, Mr. Sahni and Mr. Kohli were together. Mr. Sahni has penned a few words, and it's my privilege to read that out to you. My relationship with FC Kohli goes back several years, in fact, to the inception of TCS. He played a very important role in my growth in the organization. He was a guiding factor and a role model to not only me, but several others in the company. And I'll always remember him with a lot of respect and gratitude. And I'm sure all of you would do too. Under him, TCS grew from strength to become one of the best IT companies in the world. My heartfelt condolences to Mrs. Kohli and the family. May God give them the strength to bear his loss. May he rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Sahni. I'm introducing Mr. Pavan Kumar. Mr. Pavan Kumar was one of the most favorite of Kohli Sahab, and he used to run the data center of TCS. Later, he expanded the Delhi setup, which was expanded with great success. After TCS, Mr. Mr. Pavan Kumar became the first GM for Tata IBM at Bengaluru. I believe I'm to read his speech as well. He has shared a few words. So this is from Mr. Pavan Kumar. I've always been saying that whatever I am today, I owe to respected Kohli Sahab. I had the privilege of reporting to him from 74 to 1993. His contribution to build an industry of India deserves appropriate recognition by bestowing a Bharat Ratna award for his contribution. Talent like Kohli Sahab's is rare, transforming himself from a top-class power engineer, having set up the first load dispatch center while serving Tata Electronic Company at Bombay. After completing his MS from MIT US, he decided to return to his motherland rather than settling at a foreign land. And what an illustrious family. Have also said that there was a time when Mrs. Swarn Kohli was the chairperson of CSI, which was the Consumer Society of India, and Kohli Sahab was also the chairman of CSI, which was the Computer Society of India. I've had the pleasure of knowing and liking the whole family, including the sons, Madhur, Sanjay, and the youngest, Dr. Anirudh Kohli, and his doctor wife, Malvika. Our prayers to God to let his soul rest in peace in heaven. Thank you, sir. I now invite Dr. Nirmal Jain. Dr. Jain was in charge of technology, education, and training. He was a PhD from US. He was in charge of a number of operations outside of US, which he helped establish and develop. In 1996, he was appointed managing director of Tata Infotech. He has been advisor to many companies and startups, and he was part of the senior management team. Dr. Jain, kindly share some thoughts.
I break in early. So good morning to everybody. I was indeed fortunate to have Mr. Kohli, the great visionary, the father of Indian IT industry, as my mentor, my teacher, and my professional father for many, many years, many decades. I learned how to manage different situations with him, how to be sincere and totally professional in my dealings, yet being a human being. He, Mr. Kohli, was a great problem solver in all situations. and he could visualize way beyond any normal person can. He could foresee the positive and the negative of a situation, technology, or a relationship just as quickly as he would judge a person. Mr. Kohli, amongst all, was a great human being. He was a great teacher and mentor who inspired all others. His contributions, which everybody has talked about to the country and putting India on the world map in the arena of service industry, will never be forgotten. His foresight, his perseverance, knowledge, and hard work helped TCS pioneer the Indian IT revolution. His passing is a great loss, personally for me, and more importantly for the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. I would now invite Kiran Deshpande. Mr. Deshpande, after TCS, was the managing director of Tech Mahindra and was actively involved in startup mentoring. He was the president of TIE's Pune chapter. Mr. Deshpande.
Thank you. A lot has been said about Mr. Kohli. I just want to bring out a couple of things. He was actually inventor of remote software. And just imagine that happening more than 50 years back when hardware mainframe were the main drivers of the industry, computing industry, and it was all driven out of United States. He saw the software. He created remote software industry, not just for India, but India led the foundation of remote IT services, which has now been followed by East Europeans, Latin Americans, Asia Pacific, everyone. So the world owes him a debt. I was one of those very few fortunate that I was moved from technology to sales and sales to R&D in Pune, and had the opportunity to create some real good R&D. And we created C++ development environment few years before Microsoft got to it. That was his commitment, his confidence in people. The other thing I would say is many of us coming out at the age 23, 24 out of IITs, IISc, BITS Pilani, Berkeley, and we were all molded by him, as everybody has said. Great confidence, great command, seeing future long before anybody else is sort of our DNA says that. Amazing sense of humor. He asked me to build AI group in TCS Pune, and many of my entrepreneurs that I deal with can't believe that I did AI about 32 years back. But once discussing with Mr. Kohli, he sort of remarked to me, do not forget natural intelligence as you will artificial intelligence. So he had that kind of a, light-heartedness to even serious problems that we solve. I just want to end this saying, as I have said in last 10 days, the movie Anand, there was a last dialogue, it said, Anand mara nahi, Anand marte nahi. Mr. Kohli lives with us, he will live with us, and all of us have the mandate to carry forward his vision, and we will all do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deshpande. Mr. Suresh Kriplani. Mr. Kriplani was with TCS from 1979. He was part of TCS's Master Key software products group. He set up operations in Abu Dhabi and was a resident manager in Washington. After TCS, Suresh was partner at PwC, at IBM in Washington. Mr. Kriplani and his father shared a close relation with Mr. and Mrs. Kohli. Mr. Kriplani.
Suresh, you're mute.
Mrs. Kohli, from me and my family, our condolences. As Kiran just said, there's so much to be said and so much that can be said about this extraordinary person. So let me just leave you with a sliver of an image. In the late 60s, early 70s, the West was rapidly developing computing technologies. In India, after independence, we were educating smart and brilliant engineers, but struggling with a third world economy. Now, here's where India gets lucky for a change. Mr. Kohli becomes the general manager of an obscure Tata computer center. He just happens to be a brilliant engineer from MIT and a multi-layered visionary. He's also an educator who sees this vast resource potential that our country has been nurturing, and he matches it up. His credibility is that spark that convinces Burroughs to trust him. And our DIC becomes the flame that ignites the West's unsatiable demand for software engineers while fueling it with this unending supply of brilliance. The technology world starts to light up. And India begins to move from the third world into this powerhouse economy. One man, one spark, one gem. Our Mr. Kohli, truly a Bharat Ratna. He also realizes that this fire needs to be fueled and burnished. And he creates this trail of continuing education, best practices, decency, honor, discipline. And wonderful new companies start to erupt, like Wipro and Infosys and HCL and Nihilant. And they start to blossom in his steps and develop roots to make India's tectonic shift into this powerhouse economy and propel it into the modern world. Some of us are spectators, some participants, some the fuel. And some of us have been really fortunate to have that front row seat to witness this magnificent performance. Along the way, he lights up millions of lives. And I'm one of those. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kriplani. I'd call upon Mr. R. Narayanan. Mr. Narayanan was in charge of TCS's training programs and continuing education program and headed the global learning function from 1995 to 2005. Prior to TCS, he led the quality assurance function at ISRO. Mr. Narayanan. Mr. Narayanan, maybe you're on mute.
Yeah, I am audible now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. June 2000, answering a question from a fresh trainee, Dr. Kohli said, I have been building people. I will continue building people till the very end. Answering another question, he said, as long as you want to be a professional. Now, walk the talk, he did. He continued building people till the very end. He never stopped learning, never stopped being a professional. The Corporate Learning Center in Trivandrum shared a mutually affectionate relationship with its creator, Dr. Kohli. With our humble and respectful pranams to the great Guru.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rajiv Sodhi. Mr. Sodhi was with TCS from 1981 to 97, was the resident manager at Bristol, UK and at New York. After TCS, he joined HCL and retired as corporate executive vice president. Mr. Sodhi.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Kohli to me was a fatherly figure who created an opportunity for me and many other colleagues to join in his tireless and endless endeavor to give us a proud identity of knowledge. I had graduated from BITS Pilani in 1981 and had an admission in US for MS and PhD, and my visa was rejected. I was very dejected, and when I joined TCS and saw the technology that and the training that it gave me, I never missed that experience of going to US, and have since come back 10 times from different companies and joining in his vision to grow India, to work for India. Some of the things that I'd like to share is when I was the RM in the US, the opportunity that I got because of him to meet, whether it was in the Nobel Laureates corridor in AT&T, or whether it was the MIT, which was his favorite place to visit. Every time he came, he would come and see what new developments were there. I was nominated to the USL board, Unix System Labs, and was the only Indian company represented on that. It was all because of him. So the exposure and the experience that I got working in TCS made me who I am. I'm had this opportunity with him and Swaran ma'am as his aide when he was awarded the honorary doctorate degree of Shiv Nada University in 2015, which is very graciously accepted. He has doctorate from so many universities. Though he's no more, he will live forever in our hearts as a role model, a fatherly figure, a mentor, and a guide and a human being of utmost morality and values. I really pray to God to give him peace and all of us inspiration to continue his work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sodhi. Ms. Chanda Sabharwal Hate. Ms. Hate joined TCS in 1975 and had a long stint with TCS. She was involved in the development of sophisticated HR systems and policies. She retired in 2011 as the global head of HR for TCS Global Consulting Practice. Ms. Chanda Sabharwal Hate.
Today, I have the honor of paying tribute to my guide, mentor, and coach, Mr. FC Kohli. His passing away is of a personal loss to me. Mr. Kohli taught me that there is no problem without a solution, and excellence in everything that we do, big or small. They have become my life mantras. Mr. Kohli's command over English was very good. I came across the word succinct for the first time in his memo. I used it. He smiled and said, good. Such a brilliant example of coaching. Mr. Kohli, TCS is the pioneer of HR practices in IT industry. Mr. Kohli gave me the opportunity to work on various HR initiatives under his direct guidance. I owe all my strengths on forte as an HR professional to him. Mr. Kohli was very caring. I was witness to times when he provided support with a personal touch to employees who were facing challenging health and related financial situations. He would call them to his office, get up and go around the table, put his hand on their shoulder and say, don't worry, your problem is now our problem. You get well fast. I used to feel so proud of him at that time. All in all, he was a great human being. You will be missed, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. T.K. Jagan. Mr. Jagan joined TCS in 1978 and was with TCS till 1989. He established the operations in USA Midwest from Chicago. Mr. Jagan.
Good morning, everybody. Deepankar, can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. First and foremost, my heartfelt condolences to Mrs. Kohli, his sons, and the rest of the family. I am one of the many hundreds of beneficiaries of Mr. Kohli's kindness and his foresight and his trust and confidence in young people, and I was one of those recipients at a very young age. He gave me the opportunity to set up a new US office for TCS at a time in the mid-80s when Indian IT was relatively unknown, especially in conservative Midwest US. After some struggle for many months, I managed to get an audience with the top management team of a leading global high-tech company in the suburb of Chicago. Mr. Kohli, Mr. Ramdurai, along with Mr. Palkiwala flew down, and we went, and the plan was to make a presentation to this company. I prepared everything from the TCS perspective, transparencies at that time, if you will, and Mr. Kohli gave them back to me, and he said, Jagan, don't worry, I will speak extempore. And I was wondering, what's he going to say? And Mr. Kohli went on the podium and he spoke about India, about India's potential, about the skills and capabilities of Indian engineers, and then about the Tata Group, and finally a little bit about TCS, probably 10% of his overall speech. We stepped out of the meeting and I asked Ram, Mr. Kohli is talking about other things, not about us. Ram said, don't worry, Jagan, things will happen. And it happened. Suddenly, out of the blue, we had contracts coming from this organization across the world to do offshore work from India for high-tech solutions, which nobody could have imagined in the mid to late 80s. That was his faith and confidence in India. And that organization went on to establish relationships in India. A subsequent event occurred in the late 80s in a meeting over dinner, myself along with 3 other colleagues, RMs then in the US. The topic veered to our own growth, opportunities, and stuff like that. And somewhere someone commented that we would never be able to make a pitch for the top jobs in Bombay House. And Mr. Kohli shot back, don't worry, my TCS boys are second to none. Today we see living proof of that within his lifetime. An amazing man with tremendous vision, tremendous capability, and every meeting with him, though small, so limited, was a learning experience. I'm grateful to you, sir, for what you have done for me as an individual, as a small person, and for all of India in many, many positive ways. We will cherish your contribution. We want to honor you. May your spirit guide us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now invite Mr. S. Mahalingam. Mr. Mahalingam is the ex-CFO of TCS. Mr. Mahalingam has devoted his entire professional life to FCK's legacy. I would request him to kindly invite Mrs. Kohli to grace us with her thoughts. Mr. Mahalingam. Mr.
Yeah. If Mr. FC Kohli was the rock of Gibraltar, Mrs. Swaran Kohli remained the very ground on which the rock stood. Mr. Kohli was introduced to Swaran by their appearance in 1952. The stars were fully aligned as two soulmates got together. They supported each other with their heart and soul as they raised a family of 3 boys. We saw them together as they looked after the TCS family. We fondly recollect the enthusiasm with which she would participate in picnics and events bringing us together. Traveling all over the world with Mr. Kohli, she helped him in setting up relationships. Mrs. Kohli hosted many dinners for clients. Many times her gracious presence seemed to lessen the burden of the tough demand that Mr. Kohli placed on us. She, a qualified lawyer herself, pursued an independent career as a protector of consumer rights. Swaran Kohli has been an activist in this sphere, as Mr. Kohli has been in the technology landscape. As Mr. Kohli looks at us from his heavenly abode, we shall continue to seek your affection, guidance, and love. Mrs. Kohli.
Mrs. Kohli, can we unmute Mrs. Kohli, please?
See you unmuted.
We can hear you.
I'm very grateful to all of you, for all that you have said. He loved you all, and he only wanted to work. I used to sometimes tell him that why do people who are so brilliant with you leave you and go and set up other companies? He used to say, that is my mission, that I am very glad that they go and start new companies, and not only they do for themselves, but also for the country. That is my mission, to develop people and to develop the country. I'm very grateful to all of you for all the affection and all that you have done. You have always been our family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kohli. Thank you for gracing us with your presence and your words. I would want to acknowledge that we have videos that have come in from Mr. Praveen Gandhi, Dr. Mehta, and Mr. Abid Ali. We unfortunately have run out of time, but we will be posting these on the website and everybody can watch up there. We would now be observing a silence for 30 seconds, followed by chants from the Rig Veda, which have been recorded specially for today's Shraddhanjali. Please, I would request everyone to join us in silence for 30 seconds.
शान्तिरन्ताय चक्रं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वदेवायः शान्ति ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वगं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि ॐ शान्तिः 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 ॐ द्योः शान्तिरन्ताय चक्रं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वदेवायः शान्ति ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वगं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्ति ॐ द्योः शान्तिरन्ताय चक्रं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वदेवायः शान्ति ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वगं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि ॐ शान्तिः 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 सर्वरिष्ट शान्तिः ॐ आत्मा शान्तिः ॐ पितरः शान्तिर्भवतु ॐ शान्ति ॐ शान्ति ॐ शान्ति
I would now request Mr. Praveen Gandhi to close today's Shraddhanjali with a vote of thanks. Mr. Gandhi is a software professional, a businessman, and an author who used to head the products group at TCS. Mr. Praveen Gandhi.
Mr. Kohli, the legend, the patriot. What a perfect description of the great man. There cannot be a more fitting farewell to Mr. Kohli than with the Rig Veda prayer for the soul to find higher abode and moksha. The legend that was Mr. Kohli had a vision of putting India on the map of the world because he had faith in the ability and intelligence of Indian youth. He believed when nobody did, for India was a bullock cart economy then, and indeed succeeded in making India the software powerhouse that the world sees in India today. Karke dikhaya. The patriot in Mr. Kohli appreciated and encouraged those who would build India of today and tomorrow. He was mentor to hundreds, even thousands. On behalf of all mentees, I thank our departed mentor from the bottom of our hearts. I would like to thank the organizers of this event for giving me the privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for this lovely spiritual memorial to a legend. I thank Mr. Malingam, Mr. Man Pawan Kumar, Mr. LC Singh, and Mr. Kiran Deshpande for being the inspiration and movers for organizing this memorial. Mr. Sani, you worked with Mr. Kohli the longest. Thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. I thank industry leaders, Mr. Kohli's close associates and friends, senior leaders who grew under him, members of TCS stalwart group who spoke, and hundreds who wanted to speak but couldn't be accommodated for want of time, for their tributes to Mr. Kohli, the legend, the patriot. We can see that from the tremendous outpouring of gratitude and reverence of people from all over the world. Even after all these years, the love and affection for Mr. FC Kohli continues. Thank you, Dipankar Mukherjee, for being the master of ceremonies, for authorizing the introductory poem and conducting the proceedings with grace and solemnity. Thanks to the creative group of Hyper Collective Nihilant team led by Dipankar Mukherjee for making the videos of high standard in record time from concept to execution. Thanks to Sri Nasiruddin Shah, well-known film and theatre personality, for lending his voice. To Mr. Pankaj Parashar, noted film and TV director, for facilitating the creation of the film. To Shri Hitesh Prasad, the budding Bollywood musician, for creating the soulful, spiritual background music. To another ex-TCSer and entrepreneur, Sandeep Pendurkar, for technical management of this event. Known for his execution ability, he worked closely with Dipankar Mukherjee to execute this event to perfection. To Mr. L.C. Singh for the overall concept and production. Mrs. Swaran Kohli, we thank you for taking the time to meet Mr. Kohli's admirers and accept our tributes and condolences. To conclude, today, as the soul of Mr. Kohli leaves our world for a new world, I try to imagine what the parting message of Mr. Kohli, the patriot, inspirer, motivator would be. And I think I speak for all when I think it would be, don't rest on your laurels. Continue on the path of taking India into the league of global tech giants. Solve the problems of the common man with technology. Never stop learning. And remember my words, India has no business to be poor. Travel well, sir. Thank you all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you, everyone. We are now concluding the ceremony. Please do share your further tributes on the website. We thank everyone for joining us here.